So let's say there's a pair of headphones that you don't like the sound of, and instead of someone telling you to get a different pair of headphones, they tell you that you need to get a better DAC or amp since what you are using is just bad. Mostly with comments sounding something like, you need an amp, or rather you need this amp or this DAC amp combo in order for something to sound good. But the main issue with all of this is that the audible impact of amps, and even DACs for that matter, is oftentimes massively exaggerated. And yet still a lot of people genuinely believe expensive amps or DACs are capable of dramatically transforming the sound of your headphones, but this belief is often driven more by expectation and marketing rather than anything measurable in reality. But before we get into about why this logic falls apart, we should probably establish what an amplifier and a DAC even does. An amp's sole purpose is to amplify. That is it. It is in the name. And of course, the amplifier's job is to simply boost the voltage and current of the signal being sent from your device and transfer that to the drivers or speakers, if you will. And a DAC's single purpose is to simply take the ones and zeros from the digital audio being played and convert this into an analog signal to then be used to create vibrations on the driver diaphragm, creating sound waves we as meaty beings can hear.
Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
However, pretty much every modern device already has its own built-in DAC and amp anyway. Things such as phones, motherboards, and even this little Apple dongle has its own internal amplifier and DAC. And for the vast majority of modern headphones alone, when using them with modern devices, there is probably a good chance that you don't necessarily need an external amp or DAC in the first place. But when the topic of whether or not these things are actually changing the sound comes up is where the conversation starts getting a little weird. I recently tried out the HD490 Pros, and from that video I noticed that quite a few people in the comments were concerned because I wasn't using some expensive external DAC and amp in my setup. And almost immediately I started getting some recommendations for quote unquote source upgrades priced at several hundreds of dollars more for a pair of headphones that already cost me $400 that I was clearly getting clean and loud volumes from. I started wondering, why would spending even more money on just a different amp or DAC have any reasonable change to the way they sound? But let's take a step back for a second. The HD490 Pros I did a review on have the specs listed as having 130 ohm impedance, which to be fair sounds pretty high at first, but they also have a very high sensitivity rating at around 105 decibels, which is also important to know because the sensitivity matters just as much as impedance when determining how hard headphones are to drive. And a quick Google search would tell us that yes, headphones with high sensitivity can get extremely loud with very little power consumption. But for a pair of headphones that a lot of people could say is harder to drive, could be something like the Hi-Fi Man HEX SE that has an impedance of 50 ohms but a sensitivity of 83 decibels. And at first this honestly looks kind of normal, however decibels don't fit on a linear scale. Basically the difference of 83 decibels of sound versus 105 is what many would consider pretty massive. Which I guess this is again saying that sensitivity tells you how loud the headphones get from a given amount of power or sound, and the impedance would tell us how much voltage or current is required. So despite being 130 ohms of impedance, the HD490 Pro is actually pretty easy to run on any typical modern device. But briefly, let's just look at the Apple dongle since this is what I was mainly using. Of course, many people still argue against. A brief rundown would show us that the dongle already supports 24-bit audio at 48 kHz, which is more than enough for clean, transparent playback. And given that the internal DAC and amp is already pretty solid enough on its own, the dongle should be more than capable for something like the HD490 Pro. It's obviously a no-brainer in terms of cost to performance. But let's take for instance the iFi Zen DAC 3 as something that was recommended in the comments of that previous video. The DAC alone costs $220, and because it doesn't even include a built-in amplifier, people will often recommend another amp on top of that, which they also sell separately for another $220. So this would mean that before you've even really used your headphones, you're already hundreds of dollars deep into extra gear, and that's the part I have a hard time justifying. And don't get me wrong here, I do believe there is some actual benefit to spending more money on gear like this to a certain extent. but the actual audible improvements people claim from buying more expensive gear is constantly blown out of proportion. And before it's said that something like tube amps, for example, do actually change the sound, it's important to realize that this is also not just magically improving any headphone's audio prowess itself, but more so that it's just adding what people like to call colorful distortion. And if you like how that sounds, then that's perfectly fine. I am not here to tell you otherwise, but realistically what you're actually hearing is just a lesser clean signal of audio.
I'm like, what do you say fuck me for?
And so when it comes to using a different amp or DAC on a pair of headphones you already don't like, it is not going to magically make them sound amazing, assuming that your headphones were already getting proper power along with zero unwanted noise being introduced in the first place, and wasting your time, money, and energy in the hopes that you end up liking something more than you already don't is just not really worth it in the end. Now, I'm not trying to say that all external DACs and amps are completely useless, however, because there are still a good few pairs of headphones that will require you to actually need an external amplifier. And I would say that it's also nicer to have a clean sound from your DAC as well, not something that's constantly popping or hissing all of the time. And of course, being able to have something that you can use for all of your audio needs, like having a brick to plug both my mic and my headphones into rather than just my headphones alone, would be nicer for just the simplicity of it. And there are many people that would tell you, myself included, that any onboard audio from any of the major motherboard manufacturers is quite dog shit. But again, for most people, something like the Apple dongle is already capable of delivering clean, transparent audio without noise or distortion at such a low price comparatively speaking. And really, even both the Apple dongle and my onboard audio already sounded identical in practically every single way. But again, this is all to say that you should really be fine in most cases. I know I've probably repeated myself over 1,000 times in just this video alone, and of course I don't consider myself an audio engineer, nor do I really consider myself a audiophile of sorts. However, I am just simply someone that has access to information and the internet, and also do tend to appreciate the higher qualities of certain sound. However, again, there's many individuals that would fall into this expectation bias and seem to ignore just how quickly you reach real diminishing returns when buying all of this stuff. This idea that you are buying for the sole fact that you want a forever functioning device, not some pieces of expensive plastic and metal that is supposed to drastically change the sound of your headphones, has seemingly been lost. Because let's say, for example, that I don't like the way a microphone makes my voice sound. Nobody would tell me to keep the microphone and spend hundreds of dollars on different audio interfaces for that exact same mic. They would tell me to just simply buy a different microphone, because yes, the microphone itself is the main thing actually creating the sound I'm hearing. Yet when it comes to headphones, people suddenly start acting like the solution to a fix of a disliking of the headphones is to keep them and endlessly swap out DACs and amps instead. So just simply save your money if it matters any to you, and remember that even if something doesn't sound good to you, your best chances are just simply returning what you don't like and getting something else that you do like instead, and only ever actually buying the stuff you do need and not just falling into the trap that has claimed many before.